Hello. So this series is about Terry Deary's Horrible Histories. Um, this was a set of books that has been, I think, decades in the making. Um, it is a children's series of books about different historical periods. When I was a kid, I had, I think, 5 of the Horrible Histories books, and I read them over and over and over and over again. I loved them. Could not get enough of them. So for me, this is a big nostalgia thing that I'm doing. As an adult, I have bought the blood-curdling box of books, which contains 20 Horrible Histories books. I've also got a couple of others that aren't in this set. One about Scotland, one about Wicked Words. I may acquire a couple more, but I'm going to be making videos about each of these books. Look forward to that. If you are a person of my generation, say, I don't know, late 20s to mid 40s maybe, and you grew up on the Scholastic Book Fair, and you loved history, you probably encountered the Horrible Histories series. There's now also a TV show of it that I may or may not watch. But yeah, love Horrible Histories. This is going to be pure nostalgia for me.
Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Terry Deary's The Savage Stone Age, part of the Horrible History series, obviously. So on a personal note, this is not one that I grew up reading. I had about, I think, 5 of the Horrible Histories, and this was not one of them. So Savage Stone Age was a new experience for me. That being said, it was very, very rewarding. I really, really enjoyed it. This book, on the one level, this is very typical of the Horrible Histories series. You get a lot of the typical things that you get. So very early on, for example, we have a Stone Age timeline in which Deary takes us through some of the major events, transitions, shifts, evolutions, etc. of the Stone Age. This one is slightly different because it tends to work in millions of years rather than the much more sort of compact timelines that you typically get with the more geographically or the more chronologically concise Horrible Histories. So the first one starts 3.5 million years ago. Then we have 3.2 million years ago, 2.5 million years ago, 2.5 to 1.5 million years ago, etc., etc. So these are huge swaths of time that are being condensed into very, very short descriptive bits, like 250 million or 2,500,000 to 1,500,000 years ago. Early hominids are changing into more modern human beings and are using stone tools. They are called handy humans, Homo habilis in the posh scientific name. I mean, that's 1 million years of history condensed into 2 sentences. That's the Stone Age, right? That's this sort of weird Paleolithic, Neolithic type approach to history. Is you're dealing with these vast swaths of time where things change much more slowly than they typically do, at least as far as we know, for post-Stone Age humans, right? Once you get into sort of the birth of civilizations and societies and things like this, stuff tends to move faster in terms of making changes, social evolution, the development of technologies, etc., etc. And so the Stone Age is this very odd period where it's these, again, massive chunks of time in terms of like how we think of history, human history at least, in which not a massive amount of stuff changes, right? You have hundreds of generations of people who all live roughly the same type of life that their parents did, and slowly things change. So that's a really interesting one. We also get tests, quizzes. This is another standard element of the Horrible Histories series. Deary loves this strategy of here's multiple choice questions and then the answer with some explanation. So, for instance, we get test your teacher here on pages 36 through 43. That's with the questions and the answers. So, for instance, question 1. Archaeologists could tell what prehistoric Egyptians were eating 11,000 years before the pyramids were built. What did they study? A. Egyptian cookery books drawn on rocks and buried beneath the sand. B. Ancient baby poo. Or C. Ancient jawbones with food stuck between the teeth because toothbrushes hadn't been invented. Got your guess locked in? The answer is B. Ancient baby poo. I'm not going to read you the answer, but basically the short version is digestion and incomplete digestion can tell archaeologists a lot about what ancient peoples ate. And so again, all of this is in the service of teaching people. But Deary really likes these quizzes. He uses them consistently throughout his books. It's a very effective strategy because it gets you as a reader thinking about what is the right answer? What's the most likely answer based on what I know, based on what we've learned from the book, based on my external knowledge, etc., etc. And so it gets you thinking about history in a very effective way. It is a piece of rhetoric and it works. Another thing that Deary loves, of course, is jokes. So there's a couple of them he gives us that I'll share with you. One, an Agatha Christie joke, who was married to an archaeologist, her second husband. She said, "An archaeologist is the best husband any woman can have. The older she gets, the more interested he is in her." Zing! There's another one. This is a more general sort of archaeologist joke. Played out through little comic panels. I say. This is the first guy. I say. What's the definition of an archaeologist? Second guy says, I don't know. What is the definition of an archaeologist? And the first guy says, someone whose career lies in ruins. They're not great jokes. They're funny. They're nice, like dad jokes. They're not amazingly witty necessarily, but they're fun. Yeah. So this is again the standard kind of stuff that we get with Horrible Histories. This is the kind of thing that Deary is really into, and it works very well, especially I think for children. Some cool things about the Savage Stone Age specifically. There are some pretty sick burns in here, like just sort of in passing, but like things that are kind of cool and interesting. Like within the timeline of Stone Age history, Deary has this one for 15,000 years ago. Superhumans from space built ancient monuments. Their civilization is now buried beneath Antarctica. No, that's not in your history school books, but some seriously potty people believe it. Make up your own mind, unless you're one of the seriously potty people, in which case you haven't got a mind and can't make it up. So, sorry, Giorgio A. Tsoukalos. Sorry, Ancient Aliens people. But, you got burned. You got burned in the Savage Stone Age. Yeah, I mean, this pseudo-archaeology, this is a huge problem. Pseudo-archaeology, pseudo-science, pseudo-history, etc., etc. is a big problem, because it ripples out to dilute people's ability to think critically about the world around them. And so I applaud Deary for mocking them in his timeline. But that's not the only group that comes in for criticism. He says here, this is about middle of the book. Not that matters for anything. Page 53. Sir Austin Henry Layard, 1817 to 1894, led armies of workers into Iraq, tunneled into ancient palaces, and packed the greatest finds off to Britain. And then in parentheses, they can still be seen in the British Museum, which refuses to give them back to the countries they were stolen from. I mean, yeah, bro, that's true. The British Museum, along with a number of other European museums, maintains possession of artifacts, often against the desires of the people in their countries of origin. And despite criticisms, or despite claims by many people in the global north that places like the British Museum or these other sort of major European museums have facilities for the preservation of ancient artifacts that they don't have in much of the rest of the world. We also know that European museums have either purposefully or through neglect destroyed massive numbers of ancient artifacts from other parts of the world. So the idea that they're inherently safer in Europe or the United States or somewhere in the global north doesn't entirely hold up to scrutiny. But that's a larger issue with sort of the politics of ancient and colonial era museum curation, I suppose. But there's some other things in Savage Stone Age that are interesting, that are worth noting. One is actually quite a downer. There's a section called Dead Drop, and it's about 5 pages long. And basically it tells the story of a guy named Professor Gerhard Katz, who was an archaeologist, and he built this whole theory, right? He had this idea about how prehistoric humans survived and interacted, and et cetera, et cetera. He became very famous. He was extraordinarily well known. And then new technologies came along and kind of showed that he was wrong about all of the stuff that he thought. And he ended up committing suicide. And it's a very dark bit of the book. I mean, it very much sort of undercuts the general light, playful tone of the Horrible Histories series. To have this guy who feels that his life's work has been destroyed by these new discoveries, and that he's a fool who has nothing to live for. It's extraordinarily depressing. Another interesting thing on a slightly happier note, there's about 25 pages here in various ways focused on henges, particularly Stonehenge. And that's kind of unsurprising in a way that Stonehenge gets so much page space in this book, because Deary is a British author. He's writing for, I believe, an audience primarily of British children. Most of the Horrible Histories series, a disproportionate amount, are focused on periods of British history. And, of course, Stonehenge is the most immediately recognizable and iconic British Stone Age thing. And so it makes sense that so much time and space is devoted to it, but it is really disproportionate compared to the overall length of the book. And then the last thing I want to talk about is the epilogue. The epilogues in the Horrible History series are always interesting because they give us a cool final note. And this one, presented in relatively large text, Stone Agers weren't as horrible as we once thought. Right, so this is actually a really cool, interesting thing about Stone Age archaeology is, for a long, long time, and this is still sort of the popular conception, right? We had this idea of like primitive cavemen who were violent, who knocked women out and dragged them back to the cave by the hair to assault them, etc., etc. Who couldn't read, or well, they couldn't read. They hadn't invented writing, but who couldn't communicate effectively, who were very just primitive and barbaric and all this stuff. And there have been a number of striking discoveries that really undercut that narrative, right? Because we find things like substantially healed bones, right? A broken leg in the savage Stone Age, right? A broken leg would mean a death sentence. If you could not move to pursue food, to find resources, to hunt game, to do whatever, in the sort of common picture of Stone Age society, you would of course die. Right, you would not have any possibility of supporting yourself, and no one else would support you. But in fact, finding things like healed bones that have been healed and then the limb has continued to be used for years suggests that ancient peoples, prehistoric peoples, took care of one another. Right, that they had systems of care for one another. And they didn't just let people die. They didn't cast people off in the way that, say, modern capitalist society so often tries to do. They didn't let people suffer and die if it wasn't necessary. And sort of the final joke here is you get these two sort of slightly nicely dressed people walking past a man begging for change. And the woman says, "These homeless live just like Neanderthals." And the homeless man thinks to himself, "I should be so lucky." I mean, if that's not a lesson for modern capitalist society, I don't know what is.